Welcome to The Growth Project, a podcast brought to you by Amplos. Dr. Drew Brannon, joined today by Dr. Cory Shaffer. Dr. Shaffer, how you feeling today?
Feeling good, man. Feeling good. Let's get into this thing.
Feeling good. All right. Well, are you grateful for that?
Of course I am.
So we have made it a habit in the month of November every year that the Growth Project has been in existence to dedicate at least one episode to the topic of gratitude, which certainly comes up about this time of year. And so the first thing we always want to kind of mention is, although it is a normal time of year for people to be thinking about and kind of taking stock in the things they are grateful for, right out of the gates, I just want to kind of say this. Please don't limit this to just a November thing for you.
And we'll try to not do that either.
In terms of our podcast focus. Well, fair. But Cory, let's start there. Why do you think that so many folks don't really attach to or practice some of the gratitude things we're going to talk about today outside of the way the calendar kind of drives us toward that?
Yeah, I mean, I think I've been asking that question to myself over the last couple of years, in trying to better understand this, and haven't dove too deep into some, library search and read a dozen research articles about it, but more just anecdotally trying to pay attention to myself and, some of those around me. And I think what actually has helped is something I've talked about on here, the Values in Action, the VIA Character Strength Survey, which is a free survey you can do online. What it does is there are these 24 character strengths that are rooted in research, right? Universally, these have been recognized. They make up all the best things about personality. So it's nothing but good characteristics, okay? Gratitude is one of those. So in taking this survey, the point is everybody has all 24 of these. They're just going to be kind of rank ordered on what comes most natural, what's a unique character strength to you, versus whatever you find down at let's say the bottom of your list, okay? Everybody still has that within them. It's just stuff that's a little less natural. You have to work a little bit harder to bring it out.
Yeah.
So anecdotally, that was my hunch. Yeah. I observe myself. I don't think this comes natural for me. I think I really, really have to work at it. I contrast that and I think about my wife, Kim, who I've talked about plenty on the podcast, always just seems to be in such a state of gratitude, no matter what. And it's something that I've always admired about her, but man, there's some different wiring going on there.
Yeah, it's a great point.
Right? It seems to just come so natural for her, regardless of circumstance, when I really have to work to conjure it up, or I've had to do that. And I think we saw that in the past in having some conversations, even on the podcast. Katie Nichols, right? Friend of the pod, longtime contributor here with us. It seems so natural for her.
Yeah.
And so that's some of this is, I think, to a degree, depending on how you're wired, I think it does probably come very natural to people, and they do feel it year round.
I do. This is a small sample size, but you also just highlight some gender differences. Potentially.
I mean, sample size of 2.
Yeah.
Okay. But scientist over there. But yeah, I do think there is something to that. I think just how you're wired, personality differences, it either comes natural or you have to work at it. So that's also working against us. So if you get somebody who's not wired for it, who gets into a pretty fast-paced, dynamic environment, especially you throw in family life and kids and this and that, this is the kind of thing that it requires you to slow down a little bit.
Yep. So
we're not exactly setting ourselves up for success for this in a lot of ways.
Right. Yeah, I think there's a lot to it. And that's why I'm glad we're having this conversation today, because I'll offer this memory of a story to get us into it as well. Is, gratitude is a topic that we focus on and do a lot of work in this space, and a lot of the training work that we do in leadership development programs, for example. And I remember this pretty vividly. Several years ago, we had hit this topic, and a gentleman who was a part of this leadership training came up to me afterward, and it was a very, there was no lack of respect. There was no lack of professionalism. It was very fair feedback, and I was glad we had this conversation. But he was just candid and said, This feels way too kind of kumbaya-ish for me and kind of soft, if I'm being honest, about like telling me to focus on gratitude. And I get that. And I think that very well could be a common thought out there. I don't know that factually speaking, but the reason I think today's conversation is I really like the angle we're going to be taking as we talk really in more depth about some of the science behind this. And that is the point, is gratitude is a psychological construct that there's a lot of data behind this. We know a lot about the way this impacts people. We know what goes on inside of people neurologically. So I love knowing that some people think this is kind of like maybe a rainbow and unicorn type element to this, because we're going to dispel that today. Mm-hmm. That's not what this is. And there are plenty of things in the world that we have no science behind. This is not one of them.
Right.
So let's go high level too, Cory, and let's differentiate as we get into this. Some of these terms here: benefit triggered gratitude versus general gratitude. Break that down for us and differentiate kind of what's what.
Yeah, I think the benefit triggered gratitude is the one that we're all most familiar with, whether or not you know it by name. This is sort of something, I've got a 3.5-year-old son, and he understands this at this point. He's learning to understand it, put it this way. When somebody does something nice or polite for you, in response, you say thank you. That's benefit, right? So like, hey, mom made you a nice dinner, you say thanks.
Yep.
Somebody holds the door open for you, you say thanks. They hand you your cup of coffee, you say thank you. All of those are because there's a benefit is triggering that gratitude response within me. And typically that's the response, right? It's as simple as just saying thank you.
Thank you.
An acknowledgement of the action. So that's the one, again, that shows up for all of us, I hope, in our day-to-day. The general gratitude is more so I think the focus of today's conversation, though, because this means for no reason other than to literally just sit and think about the good in your life. Mm-hmm. That's the thing that we don't really ever take the time to do, as I was describing earlier.
Yeah. And this is where general gratitude is when you have deliberate, thoughtful practices that you have implemented in your life, focusing your mind, focusing your emotions on just that, of like taking stock, giving thanks, having a healthy and proper understanding of the things in your life that aren't necessarily going to be there forever, aren't necessarily, weren't easy to acquire, whether that's opportunity or that's relationship or like whatever it is. It's recognizing that, man, you know what, like I could be without this and I'm not. And so as opposed to just letting that come into my knowledge and letting it kind of like go right back out the back door with no recognition of being thankful for this, general gratitude practice is like, hey, like I consistently have a routine or habits of some kind where I take stock and give thanks.
Yeah. And some of the exercises that we've done, with groups in the past, this doesn't mean you can practice general gratitude and still say thanks. It's just saying thanks, not in necessarily because of some triggered thing.
Yes, right.
It might mean writing a thank you note to somebody and say, but more so just like for no reason other than I just want to say thank you for being in my life, for helping me get to where I am and so on. So I don't want to cross those up too much, but.
Yeah, good clarification.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's start talking about when we do that. Like, so when a person has some type of practice in the general sense that they're doing with consistency, what happens as a result of that?
I mean, there are a lot of things that happen. There are changes that occur within the brain, which is really, really fascinating. That's something we have, again, with all the gratitude episodes we have recorded here, we haven't really focused on that, so we can get to that. But there are psychological benefits, there are social benefits, and there are physical benefits. One of the articles we were checking out to kind of prep for this, the psychological benefits are basically like a happier version of you. Mm-hmm. The social benefits, a better version of you. And then the physical benefits, literally like a fitter or a healthier version of you. Like those are pretty compelling things that are happening as a result of like just, on a regular basis, taking stock of what's good in life.
Yeah, those are substantial benefits.
I would say so.
That I think, quite frankly, people are searching for just one of those.
Yeah.
and trying to figure out how do I deliver, or how do I kind of take a hold of or access a happier, better version of me. And I don't think this is where they're starting that quest oftentimes.
Yeah. So why don't we do this? Why don't we do just a brief overview of each of those and just a few bullets,
Sure.
and then we'll take a deeper dive into, I think some of the brain stuff is fascinating. So the psychological benefits, this happier version of you. So one, really what you're doing with practicing general gratitude, as we just described it, what that's forcing you to do is generate positive thoughts and positive emotions. And what ultimately ends up happening then is it becomes easier to conjure up those thoughts, those emotions.
Yeah.
Right? It's like I'm training my brain, the language that we've used for a long time. Like when you train your brain to hunt the good stuff, it notices how much good there is.
Yeah. And it does it with more consistency.
That's what I'm saying, right? It becomes easier and easier to do it. You can find it everywhere. You can find it even on the bad days. And so positive thoughts and emotions go up. We actually are more aware, more awake. There's an increased level of self-satisfaction and enhanced mood. I mean, those are all, again, the point there, like this happier version of you.
Yeah.
Pretty cool stuff.
And it's what's interesting about that too is we'll commonly hear, because we're in the space we are, of course, psychological, in the work we do in psychology, people will often say, I want to figure out how to be more positive. Like I recognize I'm a negative person. We've done lots of podcasts on self-talk, and people will often realize like, hey, I'm kind of negative. My thoughts really lean negatively. And that's true. We know that biologically. I think when people venture out and I'm going to go try to be more positive, they're not starting here. And if they did, they'd probably have more success. So instead of just trying to talk to yourself in a positive way, what a lot of this research is showing us is instead of that, just go be more grateful and focus on gratitude practices. And that pathway triggers the positive stuff we're talking about here.
Yeah, and it could be like you need to be more grateful for you and yourself. And
Yeah, could be.
you know, even if you think, I don't know, something like body image, right? But like having some gratitude for, hey, I can get up and move every day, right? And I can't do necessarily what I want to do quite yet, growth mindset. But man, I'm grateful for what I can do.
Yeah.
You know, like being kind to yourself in that kind of way, practicing gratitude literally on yourself. I think that's a piece of the increased self-satisfaction there. That matters.
Right.
So those are the psychological benefits, the social benefits, this better version of you, better communication, more empathy, stronger interpersonal relationships, more likability among group members, more involvement as a team member. I mean, you're just better able to mix and be a part of a group.
Yeah. And I think here's part of the reason why I think is, let's get down to the bottom line reality here on people. We all have some things about ourselves that we like and others like. We have some things about ourselves that we don't like very much and others don't like them either. And we might have a lot of awareness around that. I think what you find, people that are practicing gratitude with consistency, when they are interacting with these people like you're describing, Cory, or they're even thinking of these people, they are choosing to focus on the things in terms of qualities that they appreciate about these people. They're not just harping on and continuing to focus on and emphasize their weaknesses, the gaps, the things that drive them crazy. Mm-hmm. They're not ignoring them necessarily or pretending like they're not there, but they're not going to just kind of like continue to again and again and again let that become the prevailing thing that determines how they think about these people.
Sure. And even like because there's more empathy attached, there's also an understanding like, well, there's probably a reason this person is this way.
Right.
Maybe I shouldn't be so judgmental, right? I need to sit, I need to listen, I need to meet them where they are, and so on.
Yeah. And so you just think about the impact that would have and does have on the quality of the relationships you have in your life. Because if the reality is, if people that are going around if mainly focused on what isn't quite, thrilling about the other person, you'll spend your life just being annoyed with people. Mm-hmm. It's not hard to do that, unfortunately.
Yeah. Okay. So any other social benefits to this? No, we hit the social benefits again. Just wanted to give the quick broad overview here. Physical benefits. This one I think is really fascinating to imagine how this, sort of mental psychological practice can actually benefit your body. But research shows can help in creating a stronger immune system, less body pains and aches, optimum blood pressure and cardiac functioning, and better sleep and wake cycles.
I don't think this is a kumbaya construct.
Well, hopefully your boy's listening.
I didn't think that when we started this conversation either, but that's why we really wanted to have it in this way of the depths in which this affects humans is as far-reaching as really, I would rival this to really anything that's out there in terms of psychological constructs that we have the capability as humans to decide and impact. We get to make these decisions every day about how we get up and what we do and what we focus on. And I think this is extremely low-hanging fruit to enhance the quality of your life.
I agree. Yeah. Again, just considering the kind of things that we're talking about here, they really don't take up a ton of time. Do you need to be intentional? Yes. But we're talking about things that you could probably practice 5 minutes a day.
Right.
And get so many benefits from, as we're describing. It just seems like, man, such low-hanging fruit to take care of yourself or be the best version of yourself.
Okay, can we get into some of the brain stuff?
Sure. Why don't you take the lead on it?
Okay, so let's get into talking about, and I think this is a really, really interesting research, and let's put these pieces together because it's profound. And what we're saying is, I'll take the example of, let's imagine a person has made the decision of, it doesn't need to be anything crazy. Maybe it's, hey, twice a week, maybe it's once a week. I'm going to write a handwritten note to someone in my life expressing some form of thanks, gratitude. And this is not in reaction to something. This is just, hey, I'm proactively doing this. And I'm going to make a habit of every night before I go to bed, as I lay down to go to sleep, I'm going to just think about and literally just list one thing that happened that day that I'm thankful for. Mm-hmm. Just a couple habits. None of those is like a really heavy lift. That by doing things such as that person is likely to see literally two significant impacts neurologically in their brain. One is in terms of actual formation of the brain and changes in and the second is in terms of neurotransmitters. I think we should just pause there for a second and just think about that. And to think that that's the power of the human brain to be able to influence it in that way is pretty profound to me.
Yeah, absolutely. This is very similar in the research and some of the exercises. They kind of start blending and overlapping quite a bit with mindfulness exercises. There almost is a very mindful component to this process because it's forcing you in the moment to really think about right now I feel this way. Yeah. Right. I feel positive emotion. I feel grateful for this thing, this person, whatever it is. So you can see some of that overlap and why I think a lot of the research is very similar. If you start looking at meditation and mindfulness, similar kind of brain stuff goes on.
Yeah, so let's look more concretely at exactly what's happening in the brain when we talk about these gratitude practices. So I'm just going to list a couple of things here, beginning with through these practices, we see reduction in fear and anxiety by improved regulation of stress hormones, all happening within our brain. You see enhancement in dopamine and serotonin, neurotransmitter-wise. So obviously people are very familiar with kind of the frontline medications, frontline treatment for both anxiety and depression. Most of those medicines are dopamine or serotonin related. And so what we see here you think about we're boosting dopamine as a result of taking medication. We're seeing positive improvements and changes in both dopamine and serotonin by simply focusing on things we're grateful for, having consistent gratitude practices. And then a final one I would say here, and we touched on this a little bit, but we see cognitive restructuring that happens. So this is like neural pathways in our brain. You can literally see, no one's doing this, of course, because you would have to extract parts of your brain, but we form grooves in our brain of thinking patterns, the things that we think with consistency. And so we see changes cognitively where we can literally restructure the pathways in our brain by thinking these certain ways. The gratitude is the first part of that pathway, which then triggers positive emotions and then actually further resilience as well. So that's just to dive a little bit into the science of what's happening in our brains as a result of gratitude.
Yeah, it's pretty fascinating stuff, and I don't know if it does us much good to go into a ton of depth into different regions of the brain and this and that. But it really is interesting. Even if we've always used this just as a very simple example. It's like it's impossible to feel gratitude and anger at the same time.
Yeah, or anxiety, I think.
Sure. But the point is, like, you choose.
Yep.
Right. And if you choose to focus in on gratitude, what the research is showing, some of the brain stuff that's happening here, is you actually release some of those toxic emotions that we tend to feel and harbor. And, you talked about that a minute ago, which again is just really, really fascinating stuff. I think you mentioned the idea of just how this rewires your brain and structuring and so on. That gets back to, you mentioned earlier, the idea of self-talk, right? And why, as you noted, this can be maybe even a precursor or something to supplement some very intentional self-talk practice. We obviously would encourage anybody to do that. If that's something you want to work on, is your self-talk, great. But something to maybe do simultaneous to that is practice gratitude. Maybe the self-talk becomes easier.
Right.
Is like what you're doing is you're training your brain to, hunt the good stuff and have more gratitude, generating positive emotion. Now it's probably a little bit easier, now that I've set the table, to have positive self-talk.
Yep. And I'll tell you, you just triggered this memory in my mind talking about the relationship between gratitude and whether it's anger or anxiety or whatever. I still remember vividly, this would have been in January of 2022. So this was our first national championship with Georgia football. And we are literally in the hotel in Indianapolis on the day of the national championship. And I'm having a conversation with one of our players who is like freaking out, which is, hey, it's not exactly it's not a low stress kind of game. This is going to be you here in a few weeks, Dr. Shaffer. So he's freaking out. And what's he freaking out with? Really anxiety, just a combination of nerves and anxiety. And I say freaking out, I don't mean he's like breaking down or anything like that. It's none of that. He's just got really high anxiety. So we're having this conversation, and he's asking me what he should really focus on, of like, man, how do I kind of get out of this? And my recommendation to him was to start that whole discussion by focusing on gratitude. And it was kind of ended up being something we laughed about after the fact, but I could tell as he looked at me, his initial reaction was kind of like, is that the best thing you got for me, Doc? It's like, we're about to go play for the national championship here in a matter of hours. And like, you want me to focus on like telling like gratitude, like that's it. That's the best thing you can come up with. But yeah, it was because of what we're saying right now of it's incredible when a person feels anxious. If you can make the shift in your brain to kind of pivot over and take stock of some things we're discussing and why you're grateful, it's amazing how those nerves begin to just kind of fall right off of you.
Yeah. And I mean, the science behind that, even just to pull a sentence here from the article I'm reading, at a neurobiological level, gratitude regulates the sympathetic nervous system that activates our anxiety responses. And at the psychological level, it conditions the brain to filter all the negative ruminations and focus on positive thoughts. Yeah. That right there just summarizes the story you just told, right? So it's regulating the sympathetic nervous system that activates our anxiety response. That's a normal response, like you said, to this big event, this big moment, this big game. Yep. But in that moment, to focus in on the gratitude, it's regulating now that response. And instead of just all the focus on the what ifs and, what if I mess up? What if it could go wrong? What if we lose? And so on, the focus now shifts to the gratitude for the experience, the positive thoughts generated around, hey, I can play well and I am prepared and all those things. So really, really cool stuff to see how it, again, the research supports.
Great angle. Very way to bring that full circle. Okay. And so again, a lot of compelling science behind this. So can we do an exercise?
Yeah, I came across an exercise I thought was kind of cool. And again, there are certainly the low-hanging fruits, some of the things we've even mentioned. Keep a gratitude journal. Try to find some practice around that. You mentioned that earlier. I think I've tried to do that over the years, knowing that this is not a strength of mine. It's not something that's natural. I try to bookend my day with it. So I try to start with a little bit of it. First thing when I get in the office, I jot a couple things down. And then in the evening at night, usually now around my kids' bedtimes, try to do a little bit of it then with them. So they hopefully are better at it than I am. that kind of stuff I think is great, right? Just to kind of keep a journal or a log of it, or just to think it, to speak it out loud. Doing that, I think, with other people is cool too. Fosters.
That's a great idea.
Some connection within your family, for example. But this is an exercise I liked because I thought it was a little bit different. And so the idea behind it is, think about just your normal day to day. And what we tend to believe is that it's, big events like the family vacation or the time off spent around the holidays and all that great time we get to as a family to kind of connect, or whatever. Just these big momentous types of things are the things that we think like that's where that's what we can have gratitude for. Like that's where our happiness can come from, and so on. So yeah, let's get some of that on the calendar or whatever. But we know if the number of those events pales in comparison to just your normal routine, like monotonous, mundane day to day. So the point behind this exercise is to focus in a little bit more on that stuff. Like in your normal day to day, just the routine of your, probably especially Monday through Friday, is focusing in on some particular rituals that maybe you could shift your perspective on. And the framing here, how this is described, is like creating savoring rituals. So the idea of like savoring those moments in your day and having some gratitude for them. And those can be very, very simple things. It can be, for example, enjoying a cup of coffee in the morning. It can be going for a walk on your lunch break. It could be driving to work, right? And just trying to enjoy the scenery. Maybe no music, no nothing, just you, right? It could be the time spent. For those who exercise, like I know you, like, hey, time spent on an empty road at 5 a.m.
That sounds great.
See,
I did that this morning.
Doesn't sound great to me, but for you, that's awesome. I get that moment in a different way, like later in the day, but around exercise is the point, right?
Right.
So it's just finding these moments and capturing these little chunks of time throughout our day and trying to bring a little bit, this is kind of the intersection of mindfulness, bringing a little bit more mindful presence to that and trying to create more routine around it. The key, as it's described in this exercise, though, is we really want to bring full attention to it. So multitasking sort of kills the savoring experience. Right? If I'm, trying to enjoy my meal that I made, but I'm doing it while I'm scanning through spreadsheets and, whatever, it's like, it's not exactly savoring the meal I made.
Yep.
Right? So there is an element of focus, of doing one thing at a time, trying not to rush, even if it's just for a couple of minutes, bringing that savoring experience to life. What you can do, again, try to make a routine of that. If you're somebody who's very task oriented, maybe lives with the calendar, you can try to block some of that off as a reminder. Or just try to build it into your morning routine, your evening routine. That's most likely, it's more likely to stick in those places.
Yeah.
But then even to just take some time and the exercise is like, hey, jot some of those experiences down, but then try to relive, like, what are the feelings that were generated in doing that? And of course, I think what people will notice is like, there's absolutely a pleasurable experience in this very mundane, very ordinary day-to-day thing. Bringing some new presence and perspective to it makes it a very, very rich experience. And now something that you can look forward to every day.
With consistency, yeah.
Yep.
So the two themes that were really clear in what you just communicated about that article or about that exercise, in terms of takeaways, one, the importance of pace. And there's a very clear relationship that you'll find between the pace at which people move and the degree to which they practice gratitude with consistency. And the dynamic of that, I think, is pretty obvious, but I'll say it anyways. One of the biggest enemies to you doing this better, you meaning our listeners, is going too fast.
Yes.
Trying to accomplish too many things in a day, moving way too fast, overcommitting, just filling up the space with too much stuff, too many things. When you move at that pace, you won't do what you just said, because you won't savor the cup of coffee, the meal, whatever it is, because you're doing, that was a great example of like, I'm going over spreadsheets while I do this. And is there a time and a place, like plenty of us kind of like, plow through lunch. And I mean, you do that. We all do that. I'm not talking about every time you have a meal. But so pace is a big one. And then the other thing I heard you say, Cory, very clearly is, in terms of a theme, is the importance of planning / scheduling.
Yeah.
Like you've got to plan well in order to ensure that these things are happening in your life.
Yeah. So some of the questions, the reflection questions, I think are really good and lead you to what can happen if you do this regularly. So looking back over the last 7 days, have you noticed more positive emotions compared to your typical week, just as a result of practicing more of this savoring ritual?
Yeah.
When you think back on your savoring experiences, do you feel more appreciative of small moments of pleasure? So now when you do find kind of the moments between the moments, do you appreciate them a little bit more? Right?
Yeah.
And then lastly, did savoring make you feel more aware of the pleasant experiences that can be found all around you? So now you're open up to just like, hey, there are more of these out there. And now I'm starting to notice them with more regularity.
That's a really interesting one there at the end about how when you do this, you kind of your radar intensifies a little bit.
Yep. It's like you expand your network for now what becomes this experience that I can savor a little bit more. Mm-hmm. It's kind of cool.
Yeah, you're thinking about it. You're going to notice other instances or examples of where this is true. And it's going to shift your whole thought processes is what I think probably ends up happening for people.
Yep.
Yeah, great example. Great. I mean, just simple exercise. And that's the key with a lot of these things is none of this is a real sophisticated, complex system we're asking anyone to build. I mean, this is just slowing down, taking stock, making deliberate choices to focus on the things that we want to be about, want to be thankful for. All right. So I know we got to move toward kind of wrapping up here in a second. I think this has been, I know for me, Cory, a nice different approach to thinking about what this really is. And it's a concept that if we just live on the surface level, I think it's easy to be, consistent with the example that I mentioned earlier, to be kind of dismissive of this. I think it's easy to be dismissive of this, unfortunately, and we don't want to do that. So I think this has been a real effective way to hopefully highlight for our listeners what we really mean when we say gratitude and why it's important and what the benefits are.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I think it'd probably benefit everybody from trying to be a little bit more intentional with some type of gratitude practice, a general gratitude practice, not a benefit-triggered practice like we described earlier.
Right.
And, even the suggestion here related to the exercise is like, can you find 2 pleasurable experiences each day? Again, moments like we're talking about, even these mundane things as we're describing them, but shown to have significant effect on optimism, happiness, and well-being.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that's a great place to start. That's what I was going to kind of end with for us is if in hearing some of this, you are feeling at all kind of leaning toward, I kind of want to do something with this. Like, okay, great. Please start small. Like go small, short window of time, one specific thing you're trying to do. That is the way things like this get better in people's lives of trying to kind of create a habit and have a habit become more and more intact in your life. So a lot of places where you could begin, we just ask that you try to begin with a small, short-term, concrete goal.
Yep.
Okay, final thought from you?
No, that's it. Not being sure when this is going to be dropping, but happy Thanksgiving to our listeners.
Absolutely.
Thank you for always gratitude for you guys.
Absolutely.
Appreciate you being a part of, our crew and showing up week after week to hear what we have to say. There's certainly some gratitude for that.
No doubt. You don't have a podcast without listeners.
Yeah. So just thanks to you guys.
So turkey or ham?
That's not even a question. Turkey.
Hey, you bring that question up and you sometimes get some strong answers, strong feeling for people.
That was strong, but it was strong in the correct direction.
Dr. Shaffer is a turkey guy. So
That's
now
right.
Our listeners are now aware where you fall out on that question. Well, hey, thank you for tuning in. As Cory mentioned, grateful for each of you all. And if you continue to find this to be a helpful resource in your life, please pop over to Apple Podcasts or Spotify, leave us a review, let us know how we're doing, and also how we can do this better to serve you well. All right, thanks so much.